Jai Hind. Today we are going to examine India's foreign policy through three foundational lenses: Panchsheel, non-alignment, and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. These are not merely historical doctrines or abstract philosophical ideas, rather they represent a distinctive intellectual tradition that has shaped India's conduct in international relations, blending normative aspirations with strategic calculations. What makes India's foreign policy particularly compelling is that it resists simple categorization. It is neither purely realist nor entirely idealist. Instead, it reflects a carefully negotiated balance between ethics and power, principles and pragmatism. This lecture will attempt to unpack the balance. We will explore how these three ideas emerged, how these functioned, how they functioned in different geographical contexts, and how they continue to influence India's foreign policy in an era defined by multipolarity, great power competition, and non-traditional security challenges. At a deeper level, we are also engaging with the broader question: can a state meaningfully integrate ethical principle into foreign policy without compromising its strategic interests? So, moving forward, to understand India's foreign policy, we must begin with its historical experience and civilizational context. Unlike many Western powers, whose foreign policies evolved through imperial expansion and strategic dominance, India entered the global system as a post-colonial state shaped by anti-imperial struggles. This experience produced two enduring impulses. First, a commitment to sovereignty, independence, and resistance to domination. And second is a belief in cooperation, dialogue, and peaceful coexistence as alternative to coercion. At the same time, India's long civilizational history contributed a set of philosophical ideas emphasizing unity, ethical conduct, and interconnectedness. These ideas were not abandoned in the modern era. Instead, they were reinterpreted and incorporated into foreign policy thinking. Thus, from the very beginning, India's foreign policy operation within a dual framework: a normative framework rooted in an ethical philosophical tradition, a strategic framework shaped by geopolitical realities. The interaction between these two frameworks is what gives Indian foreign policy its distinctive characteristics or distinct character. So, if we talk about the foundation of Indian foreign policy, building on this introduction, we can identify several foundational pillars. The first is the anti-colonial legacy, which fostered a deep skepticism towards power hierarchies and external intervention. This explains India's consistent support for decolonization movements in Asia and Africa during the mid 20th century. India saw its own independence as a part of a broader global struggle against imperialism. The second pillar is strategic autonomy. India has historically sought to retain decision-making independence in foreign policy, avoid excessive dependence on any single power. This is not isolationism, but rather a strategy of engagement without subordination. The third foundation is the commitment to peaceful coexistence. Given its diverse society and complex regional environment, India has consistently emphasized stability and non-aggression as necessary condition for both domestic and external security. Finally, India's foreign policy has deep development-oriented economic growth. Development-oriented, where we talk about economic growth, technological advancement, and capacity building have been to central objectives. For example, India's development partnership in Africa through initiatives like lines of credit and capacity building programs reflect a belief that development and security are deeply interconnected. These foundational elements gives the intellectual and strategic context for the emergence of Panchsheel. So, now the question arises: the concept of Panchsheel, or the five principles of peaceful coexistence, was formally articulated in 1954 during an agreement between India and China concerning Tibet. However, its significance goes far beyond that specific context. Panchsheel represents an attempt to establish a norm-based framework for interstate relations, particularly among newly independent states emerging from colonial rule. It reflects the belief that international stability can be achieved not only through power balancing but also through shared norms and mutual restraints. Philosophically, Panchsheel draws from multiple sources. Its emphasis on non-violence and coexistence reflects Gandhian thought, while its focus on harmony and balance resonates with broader Asian traditions, including Buddhist and Confucian ideas. From a theoretical perspective, Panchsheel aligns closely with constructivist approach to international relations, which emphasize the role of norms, identities, and shared understandings in shaping state behavior. So, moving forward, what are these five principles of Panchsheel? The five principles themselves form a coherent framework. The first principle is mutual respect or sovereignty and territorial integrity, underscores the importance of recognizing the legitimacy of state boundaries. This was particularly important in the post-colonial context where borders were often contested. Uh, the second principle, non-aggression, rejects the use of force as a legitimate tool of policy. This is significant because it challenges the realist assumption that military power is the primary means of ensuring security. The third principle, non-interference in internal affairs, reflect a strong commitment to sovereignty. It is rooted in the idea that external intervention often exacerbates conflict rather than resolving it. The fourth principle, equality and mutual benefit, challenging hierarchies or hierarchical international structure and promotes a more equitable distribution of power and resources. Finally, the fifth one is peaceful coexistence, which uh, encapsulate the broader vision of world where states with different ideologies and system can coexist without conflict. Together, these principles forms a normative architecture for international relations, emphasizing restraints, respect, and cooperation. So, what is the significance of Panchsheel? The significance of Panchsheel lies in its influence on both regional and global diplomacy. It played a crucial role in shaping the discourse at the Bandung Conference of 1955, where leaders from Asia and Africa sought to articulate a collective vision of international order. Panchsheel provided a framework for African-Asian solidarity, emphasizing independence, equality, and cooperation. Moreover, Panchsheel contributed to the emergence of a normative dimension in global politics, highlighting that international relations are not governed solely by power but also by shared principles. However, its limitation became evident during 1962 India-China war, which exposed the gap between normative commitments and strategic realities. This event demonstrated that norms cannot substitute for power in situations of conflict interests. The tension between idealism and realism is a recurring theme, and it became even more pronounced when we examine non-alignment. So, non-alignment emerged as a response to the bipolar structure of the Cold War, where states were uh, pressured to align with either the United States or the Soviet Union. India's decision to remain non-aligned was not an act of neutrality or indecision. Rather, it was a strategic assertion of independence aimed at preserving freedom of action in a highly polarized environment. Non-alignment allowed India to avoid entanglement in great power conflicts while simultaneously engaging with both blocs on its own term. It reflected a belief that alignment would compromise both sovereignty and flexibility. From a theoretical standpoint, non-alignment can be seen as a can be seen as a form of strategic hedging, where a state avoids exclusive commitment in order to maximize its options. So, what were the objectives of non-alignment? The objectives of non-alignment were multifaceted. First, it sought to avoid military entanglement in superpowers conflict. This was particularly important for a newly independent country with limited resources. Second, it aimed to promote global peace and stability by advocating dialogue and cooperation over confrontation. Third, non-alignment supported decolonization and the empowerment of newly independent state. India saw itself as a leader of the developing world, advocating for a more equitable international order. And fourth, it enhanced India's bargaining power by maintaining relations with both blocs. India was able to secure economic and technological assistance from multiple sources. For example, the Soviet Union played a key role in developing India's industrial base, while Western countries contributed to its technological and educational sector. So, moving forward, the non-aligned movement established in 1961 institutionalized the ideas, institutionalized these ideas. Leaders like Joseph Broz Tito, Yugoslovakia, Jawaharlal Nehru, India, Gamal Abdel Nasser from Egypt, Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, and Sukarno from Indonesia, envisioned NAM as a platform for collective actions among developing countries. NAM played a significant role in shaping global debates on issues such as nuclear disarmament, economic inequality, and political sovereignty. It provided a voice to countries that might otherwise have been marginalized in a bipolar world. However, NAM also faced challenges, internal divisions during national interest, and the eventual end of the Cold War reduced its effectiveness. Despite this, it remains an important symbol of collective autonomy and resistance to dominance. So, what is the relevance of non-alignment today? In the post-Cold War era, non-alignment has evolved into what is often described as the multi-alignment. India today engages with multiple powers simultaneously. It is part of the Quad, engages with BRICS, maintains strong ties with Russia, and participate actively in global institutions. This reflects a shift from passive non-alignment to active strategic engagement. However, the core principle remain unchanged: strategic autonomy. India continues to avoid exclusive alliances, preferring instead to maintain flexibility in its foreign policy. This approach allows India to navigate a complex global environment characterized by multipolarity and shifting alliances. So, now next concept is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam introduces a broader philosophical dimension. Derived from ancient Indian text, it translates to the world is one family. The idea emphasizes interconnectedness, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. It challenges the notion of international relation as a purely competitive arena, suggesting instead that cooperation and solidarity are essential for addressing global challenges. From a theoretical perspective, this aligns with cosmopolitan approaches to international relations, which emphasize global citizenship and collective responsibility. So, let's talk about the application in foreign policy. In practical terms, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam manifests in India's approach to global issues. India's humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations reflect a commitment to global solidarity. For instance, India's assistance during natural disaster in neighboring countries demonstrates its willingness to act as a reasonable regional power. In the realm of climate diplomacy, India has emphasized the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, advocating for fairness in addressing global environmental challenges. India has also pushed for reforms in global governance, arguing that institutions like the United Nations must become more representative of contemporary realities. So, in contemporary practices, these principles are reflected in various policy initiatives. The Act East policy aims to strengthen economic and strategic ties with Southeast Asia, reflecting both strategic interest and a broader vision of a regional integration. The Neighborhood First policy emphasized the importance of stable and cooperative relations with neighboring countries. India's engagement with the global south and its emphasis on multilateralism further demonstrate its commitment to inclusive global governance. For example, India's leadership during its G20 presidency highlighted issues such as development, climate change and global cooperation, aligning closely with the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So, let's have a critical evaluation. Despite their strength, these principles face several challenges. One major issue is the tension between normative ideals and the strategic reality. In a world characterized by power competition and security dilemmas, ethical principle may not always be sufficient to ensure national interest. For instance, India's evolving security challenges, particularly along its broader along its borders, have required a more assertive and pragmatic approach. This demonstrates that principles must be adapted to changing circumstances. Additionally, the effectiveness of these principles often depends on reciprocity. When other states do not adhere to similar norms, their utility becomes limited. So, in conclusion, or to conclude, India's foreign policy represents a unique synthesis of ethics and strategy, tradition and modernity. Panchsheel provide a framework for peaceful coexistence. Non-alignment ensures strategic autonomy. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam offers a vision of global unity. Together, they form a dynamic and evolving approach that continues to shape India's engagement with the world. In an era marked by uncertainty and transformation, these principles remain relevant, not as rigid doctrines, but as guiding ideas that must be continuously reinterpreted and adapted. So, Indian foreign policy, therefore, is not merely about navigating the international system, it is about reimagining how state can coexist, cooperate and compete in a shared global space. With this thought, I close this lecture here. Thank you. Jai Hind.